They were ordinary nights, coffee-stained, neon-lit, miles from anyone who mattered, until the moment everything that seemed normal turned quietly, horribly wrong. Chilling true stories of highway terror you must hear. A man sitting cross-legged in front of a fridge like he'd been waiting for someone forever. A lone driver on Route 82 who almost walked into a trap. A woman in a gas station bathroom who never really left. And a white cargo van that decides your exit is its destination. Each one starts with a small, silly decision. Stop for gas, answer a knock, help someone who looks stranded. Then the ordinary breaks. I'm going to tell you 4 of those nights. You'll hear the light, the smell, the sound the narrator remembers most. You'll feel that instant of wrongness that comes before the chase, before the hands on the hood, before the car taillights disappear into the dark. If you love true crime storytelling, hit subscribe. And if you survive something like this, tell us in the comments. Story 1. Quick Check, Stalker and the Chase. I worked nights for a software company back then. Deadlines were small wars. I coded with a thermos of coffee and a playlist nobody else liked. At 3 in the morning, I was on the interstate, a hoodie over my shoulders, thinking about semicolons and sleep. I pulled off at the Quick Check, the kind of 24/7 convenience store that hums like a living thing when the rest of the neighborhood is asleep. The parking lot was half empty. Fluorescent light spilled like milk over cracked asphalt. I locked the car, told myself to stretch, and walked in. It was quiet in that way I always notice when I'm alone. No one arguing about lottery numbers, no kids yelling. Just the beep of the register and the hum of the refrigeration cases. That's where I saw him. He was sitting cross-legged by the dairy cooler, not leaning on the shelf, but facing the open refrigerator like someone waiting for a movie to start. His back was straight. His stare was fixed on a block of cheese through the glass. He didn't look like he was nervous. He looked like he'd been practicing being still. You notice things you shouldn't. Maybe it's because when you're alone, your brain is free to catalog small details. His coat was too clean for that hour. His hands were folded so carefully they looked like they were hiding something. He wasn't shopping. He was performing a kind of patience that made my skin go cold. I told myself not to be silly. I grabbed a sandwich, paid, and left. That's when I saw him again. Only he wasn't by the cooler. He was by the door of the Quick Check, a silhouette in the light. He moved fast, too quick, almost slipping as he jogged to the parking lot. My car keys felt heavier than they had any right to. I got in. I started the engine. The hum of the heater filled the car, and for a second I thought I imagined everything. Then headlights flared behind me. Not another shopper. A pickup truck. Close. Too close. The truck pulled into the lane beside mine, and the man who'd been sitting by the cooler was in the passenger seat now, looking right at me. There's a moment that compresses into a single, terrible clarity. Your hands on the wheel, the smell of spilled coffee, the reflection of another man's face in your rearview mirror. The pickup's driver tapped his horn. He waved his hand in a kind of casual, slow way that felt like a threat. The man in the passenger seat smiled, or maybe the light just made his mouth look wrong. I pulled out slowly, heart in my throat. Then the pickup accelerated. It moved in a holding pattern behind me, then beside me, then directly in front of my car as we crested the on-ramp. He slammed his truck into my bumper. It was a shove, mechanical, deliberate. My trunk shuddered. I felt a rush of heat from the engine, like someone had shoved their hand into the back of my neck and was squeezing. I floored it. The highway opened, black and ribboned, a place for speed. He followed, headlights braided into mine. The first time he hit my bumper, I thought maybe it was an accident. The second time, my passenger side mirror clipped his bumper and shattered like ice. With each hit the fear thickened, turning bright and sharp at the edges. Every cliché true crime video ever made gave me unwanted ideas. Pull over, call 911, get out and confront. None of those were as crisp in real life. I kept the wheel steady, breath shallow, every muscle coiled. The pickup tried to box me in at an exit. He bumped my car hard enough that my hand slipped. I swore out loud. Traffic was thin at that hour, which meant space to run but also no witnesses. At a flashing red light I saw it. His driver's door was open, and the man from the cooler was halfway out, his legs swinging like he was stepping out for a cigarette, except he wasn't moving casually. He thrust something down as he leaned. The truck jerked forward and hit the back of my car so hard I saw stars. For a second the world turned sideways in the rear view, then righted itself. He tried to force my car to a stop by cornering me. It felt scripted, like someone had rehearsed the angles and timing. I made a choice that felt urgent and stupid and necessary all at once. I cut across the next ramp, weaving through the off-ramp lane at an angle that made my stomach drop. The pickup followed, tires whining. At one point his hood came up like a sledding dog. I heard a metallic crack. My tail light exploded inward. The pickup threw itself against my bumper again, this time at speed, and I saw the driver's face through the glass. Anger, surprise, a hunger that made the breath leave my lungs. I don't remember all the turns. I remember the radio was on, distant and useless. I remember the smell of burnt coffee and the way my sleeve stuck to the steering wheel. I remember thinking, absurdly, of the sandwich I'd left half-eaten in a cup holder. I remember the horrible intimacy of another vehicle being close enough that I could see the whites of a stranger's eyes. Eventually, and I still don't know exactly how, I found an exit that dumped me onto a service road, into a small intersection with a street light and a grocery store that, to my absolute relief, had a few other cars in the lot. I pulled in like a person trying to make a bad decision into something safer. Too fast, too loud. The pickup slowed as soon as I entered the lit lot. Its driver didn't follow all the way. The man from the cooler in the passenger seat climbed out and walked back toward the lot, not hurriedly, but with the slow, patient gait of someone who had been waiting for an outcome. I sat in my car with the engine running, hands trembling, and kept looking up at the man in the white parking lot light. My phone shook in my pocket. When I finally mustered the courage to call 911, the operator sounded precise and distant. A police cruiser came 10 minutes later. The officers asked me a string of questions I wanted to answer all at once. I told them about the man in the cooler. I told them about the pickup. They took down my statement, shorthand for the thick black line of fear that hadn't left my ribs. They said they'd check the nearby gas stations, the cameras, the license plate I'd managed to note in that blur of movement. They never caught him. The report was filed. Numbers and dates went into a file somewhere. I'm told investigations have to start somewhere, but not every story finds a finish line. I drove home that night with my collar turned up and the radio off, because sound made me feel exposed. Days later, I found a long scratch along my passenger door. 3 ragged lines like a talon had scored me and left. The thing I remember most is simple. The way the fluorescent light in the quick check had pooled around his shoes. The way he'd been so still he seemed like a prop until he decided not to be. It turns out being watched in a convenience store can be the first act in a much larger script. I didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that man's profile in the glow of a refrigerator. I went back to that quick check once, during the day, as if to prove I hadn't been the only one who saw him. No one in the crew there remembered the man. Maybe he knew their shift patterns. Maybe he had a face that slipped back into the cracks of memory. That should have been the worst part, getting rammed on the interstate. But it wasn't. The thing that stayed with me was how ordinary everything looked until danger committed itself. The same glaze of light, the same hum of the freezer, the same fluorescent flicker that hides a lot of things when you're not paying attention. If the parking lot felt eerie, wait for what happened on Route 82. Story 2. Route 82. Fake breakdown trap. Beginning. I was hauling packages on Route 82, which at night feels like a single, impossible road slicing through silence. The radio was a soft, static companion. The highway has this habit of stretching your sense of distance, so the next town is always further than it looks. That night it was late, and the sky was hard with stars. The desert air smelled like dust and brake fluid. I saw the hatchback first because of the hazard lights, 2 little blinking amber hearts in the dark. She was in a lay-by, hood popped, light spilling over the engine like a miniature stage. At that time on that road, a stranded car wasn't unusual. People broke down. People ran out of gas. People needed a hand. The default is to help. That's how towns and roads survive. Strangers step in for a minute. She was standing by the passenger side, hands fidgeting, coat clutched like an anchor. She waved when she saw me pull up. Her face looked small in the car's dim light. She smiled too quickly. Her eyes flicked to the road, then to the scrub, then back to me. She had a jitter in her fingers I couldn't ignore. I've driven this highway enough to know when something is off and when something is simply late-night nerves. There's a pocket in my brain now that catalogs microtells, and that night it lit up like a fire alarm. Her story came out in clipped pieces. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as she talked. Flat tire, no spare, battery trouble. She kept refusing offers for me to call her a tow. She kept saying she was fine. She kept looking at the horizon like she expected someone to step out of it. I didn't stop because I wanted to be a hero. I stopped because I'd been taught, somewhere between polite and practical, that if someone needs help on a deserted road, you help them. Also, I could see the highway for miles. There was no traffic backup, no visible truck headlights except for my own. The hatchback's driver door opened as I cut my engine. A man stepped out from behind the bumper as if he'd always been hidden in the shadow of the car. He blended into the night like he wanted to be part of it. He emerged slow, hands empty, face unreadable. And then there was someone else. An angle in the road where a third figure stood, dark against the sky, a silhouette holding what looked like a pipe, or maybe a bat. My heart did that lurch thing people talk about. I'm not brave. I'm not a hero. I'm a person who knows what to look for after reading too many cautionary posts and listening to too many grim podcasts. My glove compartment had a permit for a firearm on the day I stopped. That detail is as factual as the night sky in my memory. I had it for work, long shifts, lonely roads. But owning a gun in a moment like that is not a solution-serving banner. It is a weight, a question with legal and moral edges. I told myself to stay in the truck, keep it casual, keep the doors locked, keep the windows down just enough to talk. She smiled and leaned closer, put a hand on the hood like she was trying to keep balance. Her fingers were too steady all of a sudden. The man behind the hatchback watched the road like a border guard. The other man blocking the lane adjusted his stance as if he were ready to walk forward and make the world smaller. I could see them in profile now, the jittery woman, the hidden man who hadn't looked like someone who belonged in daylight, the blocker with the long shadow. Simple geometry told me where the danger could be. The car's taillights painted the gravel red. The night smelled of rubber and something metallic. Maybe the car's radiator, maybe adrenaline. I thought of my family in the back of my head, the routines I'd missed, the small texts I hadn't read that day. And I realized how thin the choice in front of me was. Pull off and expose myself, or keep driving and maybe live with the guilt of not stopping. The ethical question landed like a stone. My fingers tightened around the wheel until knuckles paled. She asked me if I could call for a tow. I said, of course. I said it like a man promising himself two things: help and an easy exit. I reached for my phone and pretended to call. I moved slowly, keeping an eye on the men. They didn't rush me. They didn't need to. The street was a stage, and their rhythm suggested they were prepared to let the scene unfold until the exact right moment. Then the man behind the hatchback straightened and stepped out fully into the open. He was closer than I expected. His face was unremarkable in the way that makes people easier to forget. A plain jawline, a buzz of hair, a pair of tired eyes. But it was the way he moved that read as practiced. He didn't ask a question. He just looked at me. The blocker took a half step forward, and that tiny movement sucked the air out of the night. I didn't act like the movies tell you to. I didn't flip into bravado or reach for cinematic confrontation. I kept my voice steady. I said something like, "Everything okay?" And the woman smiled like she'd been waiting for me to ask it. Her hand went down to the passenger seat as if to pick something up. That's when my stomach turned cold. You learn things fast on the road. One of them is the difference between a reach for a purse and a reach for something that changes the geometry of a situation. Her hand disappeared into the seat, and then, before I could decide the story I'd tell later, she yanked out a battery that looked like it could power a burner phone, small and low-tech. She held it like it was nothing. The man near the bumper relaxed the way someone who realizes a trap is working relaxes. I thought about driving off then, tucking my hands into my pockets and pretending the truck had a mechanical problem that needed attention. Instead, I sat very still and watched the lines where light crashed against shadow. The blocker took another step, and the man who had been half hidden came closer, smiling now with that patient, practiced patience that wouldn't allow for casual charity. The whole scene tightened like a noose. They weren't acting out of visible necessity. There was a precision to their movements, like they'd rehearsed the moment when someone would stop. I kept my eyes on them. I breathed in a measured way. I told myself aloud that I was going to drive on, that I was going to keep going until a town swallowed me, until there were people and cameras and the kind of bright lights that made faces honest. But saying it out loud and doing it are different things. She stood and said, "Please, just help with my battery." She sounded small and like a script. She stepped toward the front of her car to lift the hood. That was the motion. The blocker shifted forward another pace. The man behind the bumper shifted his weight so he could get to the driver's side without being noticed. I started the truck. The sound was small in the desert, but it felt like a decision. My hands shook on the wheel. For a second I thought I felt pity for a few seconds because her face creased. No, not pity. It was more like the amplified adrenaline dopamine flash of someone who sells their emotions for rational decisions. I slowly eased my truck forward, planning to put distance between us, to pull back on the highway and radio the station, to call my dispatcher. The woman looked up quickly. Her eyes landed on me in a way that made the hair at the back of my neck stand up. She didn't look pleading anymore. She looked amused, like a cat watching a mouse consider the hole it might run through. That amusement tightened something in my chest. The man at the bumper smiled then, a small, private smile that suggested the plan had not included any improvisation from strangers. The blocker moved into the lane and raised his arm, not as a signal to stop, but like a blade slicing across a bowl of light. He wasn't waving at me. He was making sure my path would become narrower. I braked hard. Gravel bit into my tires. The man's arm lifted. The woman reached inside her coat for something small and metallic. My brain told me every possible legal consequence of pulling out and fleeing, how the law writes these moments in paperwork, and how witnesses later become ambiguous. It also told me the gut truth, that a car that decides to stop me in the desert is better avoided. I slammed the truck into gear and floored it. Dust flew up like a forgiven thing from the road. My heart hammered in my ears. The hatchback blurred in my passenger window. I watched in the split second while I accelerated that the man at the bumper had moved in rhythm now, like a dancer finally allowed to finish his step. The blocker swung his pipe in a wide arc toward my driver's side mirror. I heard a metallic thud that could have been contact or just gravel thrown by my tires. The woman's face blurred in my peripheral like a photograph smeared with oil. I don't know if she reached for a weapon. I don't know if the man meant to grab me or just to intimidate. The night was a series of hard-edged flashes. I kept my hands on the wheel, eyes forward, and tried to make my exit a clean one. The hatchback's driver door slammed shut with a noise that could be mistaken for a curse. The man near the bumper lunged toward the rear of my truck, like someone who forgot how to be quiet. The blocker stepped into the road, and 2 steps later he swung the pipe again, this time connecting somewhere near the passenger door with a roar of metal. My side mirror spun toward the earth and found air. I kept going. I have to stop here for a second, because this is the moment where stories usually split into what happened and what might have happened. Some people walk away and tell the whole thing, and some people close their mouths and let the night keep its secrets. I chose the road. I chose motion. But the night had not decided to let me go that easily. As my truck ate up the asphalt, a shape came up on the horizon that had nothing to do with the stars. Headlights, far off, then closer. Headlights that were not mine. The hatchback's taillights blinked and then vanished into the dust as if the world itself had swallowed them. Then I realized, because memory keeps the cruelest details, that the man's smile had not been only amusement. It had been a claim. This is where the story narrows. I pushed the pedal like a man trying to outrun a consequence. My phone was in my lap. I didn't call 911. I told myself there would be time. I told myself reporting might complicate things. I told myself the legal issues and the embarrassment of a near miss were reasons to stay quiet. The truck thrummed under me, and the desert blurred into streaks of black and moonlight. We're going to pause here because the road takes over in the next stretch. The man blocking the way had choices. I'd made mine. The woman's face, that small, rehearsed smile, would not be the last image I had of that night. The highway was still open, and something in the darkness had been set in motion. If that scene made your skin prickle, you're not alone. Wait until you hear the next one, the gas station bathroom where a woman leaves and never actually leaves, where the sound of breathing made everything worse. I kept my foot down until the road blurred into a smear of black and sodium light. Dust choked the cab. My knuckles felt like they belonged to someone else. When I finally hit the first town with a bright sign and a cluster of pumps, I peeled off and parked under a halo of glare like a guilty thing. My hands trembled so badly I almost couldn't open the truck door. They weren't on me instantly. The hatchback was gone from the rear view, nothing but a red smear in the night. For a second I let myself believe I'd outrun them. Then I saw movement, 2 figures leaning in the shadow by the entrance to the mini-mart, silhouettes that watched me through the glass like customers who'd been waiting for a show. I walked into the station with the physical urgency of someone who has to pretend to be casual. The fluorescent ceiling buzzed the way it does in cheap gas stations. The clerk looked up and gave me a half-smile that meant nothing. I told him I needed air for a tire and a bottle of water, but my voice came out clipped, thin. My eyes kept flicking to the door. People can act like nothing is wrong when their insides are hollowed out by panic. A woman, thin, coat cinched, hair in a loose knot, suddenly appeared by the roll-up door like she'd been there the whole time. Her face at that lit distance looked small and exhausted. Maybe she was just cold. Maybe she'd really been stranded. But she kept glancing at the lot and at me, the way someone watches a bird they want to make a pet. Patient, rehearsed, like they'd already figured out the steps. When I went back to the truck to call my dispatcher, I found them near the rear of the lot. The man from the hatchback and the woman I'd seen in the desert stood talking low, a quiet choreography. The blocker's pipe rested against his thigh, like the thing was an extension of his hand. My mouth went dry. I thought about driving off right then, making the choice to disappear into the night and be swallowed by the next stretch of highway. But there was a dull human compulsion inside me. Maybe shame, maybe the habit of wanting to be polite, that made me slouch toward them. It didn't feel cinematic. I wasn't channeling anyone heroic. I wrenched my glove box open and, with hands that finally obeyed a command, took out the small legal firearm I'd kept for that kind of solo night. The object was heavier than I expected. Holding it, I felt the weight of choices, legal, moral, stupid, pressing against the back of my teeth. The three of them fell silent when they noticed me approach. The woman's smile returned, tight and too quick, as if she'd been practicing it for this exact moment. I kept my fingers curled around the grip in a way that was obvious if you knew what to look for. I didn't wave it around like a movie hero. I kept it pointed low, legal, not like I wanted to shoot, but like I wanted to be visible enough to change their script. I said, clear and loud, "Back away from the truck." It's embarrassingly awkward to write down what I said, because the bravado of a sentence like that feels thin in memory. They hesitated. The man by the hatchback put a hand on the woman's shoulder, as if to stop her from stepping forward. The blocker shifted, the pipe angling in a way that said he was ready to close the distance if the scene played out differently. The woman reached into the passenger seat under the pretense of retrieving something that could have been innocent, a phone, a jacket. Instead, she pulled out a small dead battery and a roll of zip ties. The sight planted like a nail in my head. You don't expect props for kidnapping to be found on a stranger's front seat in a small-town gas station at 2 in the morning. It's the kind of detail that slices disbelief because it reads like paperwork for a crime. I told them to leave. I didn't shout. My voice shook, but it was direct. The man's face folded like paper. The blocker made a noise that could have been a laugh or a curse. They moved off into the dark together, not running, not sprinting, almost as if they had rehearsed a quiet exit for the cameras in their heads. The woman looked back at me once with an expression that mixed amusement and calculation. Then they were gone. I didn't call the cops that night. I told myself legalities, the unusual paperwork, the possibility of being dragged into an investigation because I had a gun, would complicate everything. I told myself names and faces would mean more than safety, that reports could loop you into courtrooms and interrogations that would expose you. Maybe I was embarrassed by the fear. Maybe I thought the truth would be softer if I buried it under the hum of the engine and kept driving. That choice sits in my mouth like a metallic taste. I left the zip ties and the battery in the cab of my truck, shoved them under the seat in case they were evidence in the future. Part of me wanted to keep them as proof of an odd, close thing that had almost happened. Part of me wanted to flush them and pretend the night had been a misread. I still replay that moment, the woman pulling those items out like she was searching for a loose coin, over and over. I think about how easily a simple instinct to help can be turned into a mechanism for someone else's plan. I think about luck and timing and the thinness of the line between polite action and danger. I told only a handful of people afterward. My sister, who told me to turn off the highway and never go back to that route. A friend who told me I should have called the police. Mostly, I kept quiet. The memory feels like a loose tooth. It aches unpredictably. If you think that was close, the next one lands in a different place entirely. A quiet gas station with a restroom and a breathing sound that should not have been there. Story 3. Gas station restroom stalk. We had been on the road for what felt like forever. Cross country, 2 people, and half a stereo's worth of playlists. The kind of trip that rearranges your internal clocks. My partner was at the wheel. I rode shotgun and pretended not to be the kind of person who notices too much. We pulled into a dim station in western Kansas because my bladder gave formal notice and because the sign said, "Clean restrooms." The place smelled like old coffee and motor oil. Inside, the fluorescent strip over the sinks buzzed faintly. The door to the women's room had been propped half open with that plastic wedge that always seems to find its way into bathrooms. I remember thinking the stall doors looked newly painted. I remember my phone was dead in my purse because I'd been trying to save battery for maps. The woman at the sink looked tired, wearing a long coat and a hair tie that had seen better days. She offered a polite, small smile as she washed her hands. When I left the stall, she was gone. That moment, someone walking out and the door closing, was such a small, ordinary thing. I didn't think twice until I walked past the mirror and saw her again reflected in the glass that faces the entrance. She hadn't left. She sat on the far bench in the small tiled room, her jacket pulled up around her like armor. When she glanced at me, her eyes were a little too bright. I told myself she was just waiting for someone, and I was making a thing of nothing. But she stayed, silent, the way someone listens to hear if their name is called. Her presence had a sound, an undercurrent of quiet breathing that seemed louder than it should have been in that tiled box. I stepped out to the foyer to take a deep breath and text my partner. My phone stayed stubbornly blank on the counter. I told myself it was a coincidence. People wait in bathrooms all the time, right? But then I heard the stall door click like someone shifting, and the bench's plastic creak as if someone flexed their weight. I thought maybe she'd left. I turned to leave and found her standing in the doorway like a silhouette framed by the cheap light. She said, "Sorry, are you okay?" in a voice that could have been either concern or a practiced lullaby. Her hair was unkempt, but her eyes tracked me. Tracking is the right word. Precise, like someone who's learned faces. She smiled and moved in a way that suggested she was stepping outside, but then she lingered near the exit and watched the lot through the glass. When I returned to the car, I told my partner, there was a woman in there who seemed off. He shrugged, asked if I was sure, and I lied, and said everything was fine because the words, "I felt watched," felt like they would make us both more vulnerable. We rolled the windows up, locked the doors, and the engine's gentle hum felt like a shield. We should have left. We didn't. Maybe naivety, maybe that small stupid hope that being a little cautious would be punishment enough. We had to wait for the gas pump to stop, so we sat idly and cursed at the small things a long trip exposes. Soda cans that won't fit in cup holders, the lack of a decent radio station. Then she appeared at the entrance to the lot, not walking like a tourist but standing as if waiting for a bus. She had something in her hand that, in the grainy light, looked like a metal object, a small glint that caught the sodium glare. It looked wrong. Up close it could have been a key, a pen, anything. From 5 yards and in that moment, it read like a blade. She watched us as we moved. There was no attempt to engage us. She just let us exist in her view, and then reduced us to motion. When my partner checked mirrors and said we should go, I agreed so fast my heart nearly jumped through the roof. He started the car like a man who had been waiting to confirm something, and acted. We pulled away slow, as if the action of leaving might be noticed, and thus escalate the moment into what nightmares are left to build. From the rear view I watched her silhouette by the curb. She didn't move to stop us, which is somehow worse. She watched us leave like an audience that had seen a rehearsal and decided to end the play. She didn't chase. She didn't call. She just remained, rock still, as our taillights bled red into the night. Weeks later, I tried to tell the story without making it sound like nothing. I wanted the ending to be dramatic. Police sirens, arrests, confessions. Reality offered none of that. The only resolution was a small, stinging embarrassment and a decision. We stopped trusting roadside restrooms in the same way we stopped trusting off-brand chargers in motel rooms. I stopped going into isolated restrooms alone. I carried my phone in my hand when I had to. The woman in the coat never followed us down the highway, but her presence rewired something in me. That sound, breathing behind a stall door, became a noise that could rearrange a safe world into one where doors matter. If the restroom made you feel exposed, the next story doubles down on a different kind of isolation, an interstate, cold air, and a van that learns exactly how close it can get to you before your options dwindle. Story 4. I-80, Van Tailing. Winter drives are a different animal. The world narrows to a white horizon. Frost sketches the glass. My truck smelled like diesel and peppermint hand lotion because of a tin I kept by the dash. I'd been awake too many hours on a route that repeats itself until cities blur into each other. The rest area up ahead was a small Mercy, plowed lot, one plug-in heater near the restrooms, a couple of semi-trucks lined like sleeping beasts. I pulled in, parked, and let my body sink into the seat as if it were a small island of temporary sleep. I'd intended to nap for 20 minutes and then do a walkthrough. When I left, I took the long, slow route out, careful with the ice, blinking against the sharp edges of light. On the far side of the lot, a white cargo van sat with its lights off, tail tucked into shadow. At first, I didn't notice it. Then it blinked a headlight like a lazy eye, just a little, to let me know it was aware. I tell myself now that there's a way to misread that behavior as nothing, Drivers have quirks. But that night my spidey sense had been worn thin by fatigue, and the light felt like an invitation. I merged onto the interstate and felt the steady cadence of speed settle me. I had my radio at a low volume and the heater on full. My eyes floated and dipped like a pianist's fingers. Then a pair of headlights wedged into my mirror. At first I thought it was a driver trying to pass. The van didn't pass. It stayed exactly 2 car lengths behind me, matching speed like a tail on a pack animal. I checked my gauges. I checked the mirror again. The van maintained its position. When I changed lanes to get around a slow sedan, the van moved over too. When I increased my speed a touch to make the distance, the van did as well. It was deliberate. At one point the driver flashed something. 2 quick taps on the horn. A slow raise of a hand in that universal gesture that could mean, roll down your window. I kept mine up as if that would be a reasonable barrier. The van responded by dropping back and then surging forward in a way that made me clamp the wheel like the way you clutch at a cliff. Traffic thinned. The interstate opened like a throat. The van closed the gap and, with an ease that meant either practice or malice, moved to the lane beside me and gestured again. The driver's face was shadowed, a hood up, someone not wanting to give features away in the glow of oncoming lights. My mind supplied options. Maybe they needed directions. Maybe they were lost. The more rational corners of my brain tried to anchor me. The colder, louder part of me screamed. Then the van did something that changed the geometry of the drive. It suddenly slowed in front of me and jogged my momentum into the kind of motion that feels like being nudged off a cliff. I swerved just enough to miss a direct bumper contact that might have spun me. Another trucker, someone who saw what was happening from the slower lane, flashed his lights and altered into the shoulder. The van backed off like it had taken a lesson in when to press and when to retreat. For 20 miles the van played the game. Close, far, close again, an inhuman patience. It timed its aggression to when the road was empty. Once, it drifted into the slow lane and carved a line that forced me to brake. My heart thudded into a syncopated rhythm. I wondered if I'd been followed out of the rest area, or if the van had simply picked me because I looked like someone alone and vulnerable. I was not a person who panicked, and I'm not a person who tried to be a hero on the side of the road. I began to look for refuge, someplace where the light would be strong and there would be people who could see. The next exit had a small truck stop, the kind with a diner and a line of idling semis. I moved toward it like someone trying to find a church in a storm. The van matched me, firing its headlights like a puncture wound. It followed close enough that I could see a smudge on its rear bumper where rust had been rubbed raw. My hands were white on the wheel. I pulled into the truck stop under glaring neon. My heart leapt into my throat when I felt the van slow behind me, and then pause at the rear of the lot, engine ticking and quiet as if it were thinking. A man in a baseball cap and a fluorescent vest was standing outside the diner smoking a cigarette. One of the semi-drivers, huge hands, a face fought by years of road salt, saw the van and took a step forward. You can sense when someone is about to intervene. The trucker's voice then carried across the lot like authority that had practice at being heard. He approached the van with the slow weight of someone who knows his presence is a deterrent. I watched as the van's driver glanced toward him and then, without ceremony, put the vehicle into gear and peeled out of the parking lot. It all happened in a breath. The van's tires spat gravel, and it made a wide, dirty arc before disappearing down the ramp. The trucker spat his cigarette and hollered across the lot, asking if I was all right. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. He clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder and said simply, "You okay, brother?" I nodded like I had the answer memorized. After I left that day, I noticed smudges on my tailgate, small but visible marks, like someone had reached up and pressed muddy hands against the paint. I scrubbed at them until my fingers went numb. A week later I found a scarcely noticeable gouge near the bumper, the kind of damage that doesn't necessarily make for an insurance claim, but makes you change the way you sleep. I gave my notice at work 2 months later. Maybe it was the mileage, maybe it was the accumulation of near misses, but the van left a footprint deeper than the literal scuff on my truck. The road that had sustained me for years became a place that felt crowded in a way that made no sense, crowded with empty threats and anonymous intent. And that little detail, the trucker stepping in, the van peeling away, stayed with me. It was proof that sometimes the thing that stops danger is not you being clever, but the presence of another person deciding to notice. It's not the same as a happy ending. The van was gone. I never knew who drove it or why it had chosen me on that route. The smudges were there. The memory of being matched mile for mile by something with no face remained. Final montage and reflection. 4 nights, 4 small decisions, 4 ordinary places that turned on a dime, convenience store lights that mask a predatory patience, a woman asking for help on a lonely route who may have been rehearsing a script, a bathroom with someone who never left, a van that treats you like a test and learns your route. What ties them together is a pattern, solitude, a small uncanny detail, a sudden escalation, and then a rush to escape. The grotesque part is the ordinariness of it. The man by the cooler didn't look like a monster. He looked like someone waiting for a bag of chips. The hatchback's woman smiled like she needed kindness. The bathroom woman washed her hands like she belonged there. The van wore the disguise of a worker's vehicle. Danger doesn't always arrive announced and loud. Often it waits in polite forms, in small rehearsed actions that make the world thin. I won't tell you how to defend yourself. I won't list maneuvers or tactics. That would break the rules of this kind of storytelling, and would do a disservice to the complexity of these encounters. What I can do is insist on a few plain truths I learned the hard way. Trust your instincts. The prickling at the base of your skull has a reason. Where possible, choose places that have people and light. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If you can, let someone know where you are. Text, voice, a location pinged to a friend. There is no single perfect choice that guarantees safety. There are only smaller, better odds when you stack daylight, witnesses, and awareness. If anything from these stories echoes in you, if you felt that sudden animal alarm on a road at night, tell someone. Stories like these are not just clicks. They're data for the next person who might be in the same place. Share what happened. Share the small details that matter. A vehicle's color, a patch on a jacket, a weird prop. Even the things that feel too small to matter can make the difference for someone else in the same seat. These are true accounts from people who are doing ordinary things. Working late, stopping on a long drive, stepping into a restroom, pulling into a rest area. None of them asked for what happened. None of them expected to be on the receiving end of someone else's plan. Their endings are not neat. Some of the stories end with legal reports. Some end with smudges on paint. Some end with a life recharted to avoid the same stretch of asphalt. That ambiguity is part of the terror. There isn't always a satisfying resolution. Often the only thing you have is the memory and the knowledge that the road can change at any hour. If you made it this far and these felt important, one last simple ask. Subscribe. Share this video with someone who drives at night, and drop your own road story in the comments if you feel safe doing so. Hearing other people's experiences builds a map no single person can draw alone. And one final thought to leave you with. Because it's the same chill I felt the first time I realized the highway could turn on me. The normalest face, the quietest night, the most ordinary stop. Sometimes they are the places danger chooses. Remember that. Be seen, be cautious, be alive. Chilling true stories of highway terror you must hear. Now that you have, keep them with you the next time you pull onto the shoulder.